The morning of October 15th started like any other day in Cedar Rapids County Courthouse, but by noon, it would become the most extraordinary case Judge had witnessed in her 23 years on the bench. The imposing limestone building, with its soaring columns and scales of justice etched above the entrance, had seen its share of human drama, but nothing quite like what was about to unfold in courtroom number 7. The air inside the packed courtroom was thick with tension and the competing scents of expensive cologne and nervous perspiration. Every seat was filled, with additional observers standing along the back wall. The Martinez custody case had captured the city's attention for months, dividing the community into camps. Those who supported Robert Martinez, the self-made construction mogul who'd built half of Cedar Rapids' commercial district, and those who sympathized with Jennifer Martinez, the night shift nurse who'd sacrificed everything for her daughter. 9-year-old Emma Martinez sat rigidly in the witness chair, her small frame dwarfed by the dark leather seat that had held countless witnesses before her. Her legs dangled inches above the floor, black Mary Janes swinging slightly with nervous energy. She wore her best dress, a navy blue one with tiny white flowers that her mother had bought specially for this day, though the iron creases showed it had been pressed perhaps too carefully, too many times. Emma's dark hair was pulled back in 2 perfect braids, Jennifer's handiwork from 5 that morning when neither could sleep. Beside Emma, maintaining the precise 18-inch distance required by service dog protocol, sat Bailey. The golden retriever's coat gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, his vest clearly marked service dog, do not pet in bold red letters. Bailey's amber eyes never left Emma's face, watching for the slightest sign of distress. His training had cost $12,000, money Jennifer didn't have but somehow found through double shifts, sold jewelry, and a loan she'd be paying off for years. Judge had just asked Emma the question everyone had been waiting for. "Emma, sweetheart, can you show us who you'd like to live with?" The judge's voice was gentle, practiced from years of dealing with frightened children caught in the crossfire of adult conflicts. She'd seen children freeze before, seen them cry, seen them try to run from the courtroom, but she'd never seen what happened next. Emma's small fingers, which had been resting on her lap, suddenly moved to Bailey's collar. The movement was subtle, almost invisible to those in the gallery, but the courtroom cameras would later show it clearly. 3 deliberate taps, a pause that lasted exactly 2 seconds, then 2 more taps, followed by a circular motion with her thumb. It was a signal that had been practiced in secret, created during those long, frightening nights when Emma couldn't sleep, when the weight of her secret pressed down on her chest like a stone. Bailey's transformation was instantaneous and shocking. The calm, professionally trained service dog suddenly erupted into motion. He barked 3 sharp, commanding barks that echoed off the courtroom's vaulted ceiling. The sound was so unexpected, so jarring in the formal setting, that several people gasped. An elderly woman in the 3rd row dropped her purse, its contents clattering across the floor. "Order!" Judge's gavel came down once, twice, 3 times, each crack sharp as a gunshot. "Counselors, control that animal immediately." But Bailey wasn't finished. The golden retriever leaped from his position beside Emma, his 70 pounds of muscle and purpose moving with trained precision. He circled the courtroom once, his paws clicking against the polished floor, creating a rhythm that seemed almost ceremonial. Gallery members pulled their feet back instinctively as he passed. The court officer, a burly man named Tom who'd been working security for 15 years, reached for his radio, unsure whether to call for animal control or simply wait for the scene to play out. Robert Martinez, sitting at the defendant's table in his $3,000 Italian suit, watched with an expression that shifted from annoyance to something else. Was it fear? His attorney, William Chambers, one of Iowa's most successful family lawyers, half rose from his seat. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. I demand that the animal be removed." "Sit down, Mr. Chambers," Judge commanded, her voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument, because she had seen something the others had missed. Emma's face, That sweet 9-year-old face that had remained expressionless through days of testimony had transformed. Silent tears were streaming down her cheeks, but more importantly, her hands were moving in a pattern Judge recognized from her briefing materials on selective mutism and communication disorders. Emma was signing something desperately over and over. Help, danger, help. Bailey completed his circuit and came to a stop directly in front of Robert Martinez's table. The dog's entire demeanor had changed. His tail, usually wagging or relaxed, was rigid and low. His ears were pinned back against his head. Most remarkably, he performed what service dog trainers call an alert stance, a specific behavior trained to identify sources of danger or medical emergencies. Bailey sat perfectly straight, his body trembling with controlled energy, and barked 3 more times, each bark directed at Robert Martinez. The millionaire's reaction was telling. The man who'd remained composed through weeks of proceedings, who charmed court officials and presented himself as the epitome of successful fatherhood, suddenly looked rattled. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. His hands, which had been folded confidently on the table, clenched into fists. "Get that mutt away from me," he said, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there before, a tone that made several people in the gallery shift uncomfortably. Jennifer Martinez, sitting at the plaintiff's table, had gone pale as parchment. Her hand reached out instinctively toward her daughter, maternal instinct overriding courtroom protocol. Her attorney, David Park, a public defender who'd taken the case pro, put a restraining hand on her arm, but his eyes were wide with confusion and growing understanding. Judge stood slowly, her black robes billowing as she moved. At 61, she'd thought she'd seen everything the family court system could offer. She'd presided over bitter divorces, custody battles that turned violent, cases of abuse that haunted her dreams. But this, a service dog apparently trained to expose something so serious that a traumatized child had kept it secret for who knows how long, this was unprecedented. "Nobody move," Judge commanded, her voice cutting through the rising murmur of the gallery. "Court officers, secure all doors. Nobody enters or leaves this courtroom until I understand what's happening here." The tension in the room was now palpable, electric. Emma remained frozen in the witness chair, her small body shaking with silent sobs. Bailey maintained his alert stance, unwavering in his focus on Robert Martinez. And in that moment, everyone in courtroom number 7 understood they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that would change not just the Martinez family, but potentially the entire way the justice system understood and protected its most vulnerable witnesses. Judge reached for her phone, dialing a number she'd memorized but never had to use. "This is Judge. I need a child trauma specialist and a K-9 behavioral expert in courtroom 7 immediately. We have a situation. To understand the gravity of what happened in that courtroom, one must first understand Emma Martinez, the bright, vivacious child she had been, and the silent shadow she had become." The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It was a slow dissolving, like sugar in water, until the original substance was completely altered, recognizable only in memory. 2 years and 3 months before that fateful day in court, Emma had been the star of Cedar Rapids Elementary's 3rd-grade choir. Mrs. Henderson, the music teacher with 30 years of experience, still kept the video on her phone. 8-year-old Emma standing in the front row, her voice soaring above the others during their rendition of "This Little Light of Mine." She had a gift, Mrs. Henderson would tell anyone who'd listen, a voice that could make you believe in angels. Emma sang everywhere, in the shower, helping her mother cook dinner, playing with her dolls, even in her sleep sometimes, soft melodic mumbles that made Jennifer smile when she checked on her at night. The Martinez family lived then in a modest 2-story colonial on Maple Street, the kind of neighborhood where kids still played kickball in the cul-de-sac and neighbors actually knew each other's names. Robert had been different then too, or at least he'd seemed different. He worked long hours building his construction empire, but Sunday was Emma's day. He'd take her to Mansion to feed the ducks, to the science center where she loved the planetarium, to get rainbow sherbet at Parlor City, their special tradition, no matter the weather. The night everything changed was a Thursday in March. Emma remembered because she'd had her spelling test that day, 10 out of 10, a perfect score with a smiley face sticker. She'd wanted to show both parents, had waited up past her bedtime for Daddy to come home. The argument started at 11:47 p.m. She knew because she'd been watching the digital clock beside her bed, counting the minutes. It began with voices, muffled by walls but sharp with anger. Emma knew the sound of her parents fighting. It had become as familiar as the school bell or the microwave beep. But this was different. There was a crash, her mother's favorite vase, the blue one from their wedding. Then screaming, not just yelling but actual screaming. Emma had crept to the top of the stairs, her pink unicorn nightgown dragging on the carpet, her stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest. What she saw next would replay in her mind for months, years even, like a broken film reel stuck on the worst scene. Her father's face, contorted with rage she'd never seen before. Her mother backed against the wall, hands raised defensively. The coffee table overturned, papers scattered like snow. And then the part that finally broke something inside Emma, her father's hand raised, her mother's cry of fear, and the sudden explosion of sound as the front door burst open and police officers flooded in. Neighbors had called 911. Emma's scream died in her throat that night, and with it, apparently, went all her words. The diagnosis came 6 weeks later, after Jennifer had taken Emma to specialist after specialist. Selective mutism, triggered by severe psychological trauma. Dr. Sarah, a child psychiatrist at University of Iowa Hospitals, explained it to Jennifer in terms that made medical sense but emotional agony. Emma's brain has essentially shut down the pathways for verbal communication as a protective mechanism. She can speak physically. There's nothing wrong. But psychologically, she cannot access that ability. It's as if her mind has locked away speech to protect her from further trauma. Emma could still communicate in other ways. She nodded or shook her head. She wrote notes in careful, looping handwriting. She drew pictures, so many pictures that Jennifer had to buy crayons in bulk, but not a single word passed her lips. Not mommy, not yes or no. Not even a cry when she fell off her bike and needed 6 stitches in her knee. The silence was deafening for Jennifer. She would sit outside Emma's room at night, hopping to hear something. Anything, even sleep talking, would have been a miracle. Teachers reported Emma participated in class through written work but remained absolutely mute. Birthday parties became torture. Other children would whisper and point at the girl who won't talk. Emma's world shrank to home, school, and therapy appointments. Enter Bailey. The idea came from Doctor during a particularly difficult session where Emma had shut down completely, refusing even to make eye contact. "There's a program," she said carefully to Jennifer, "using specially trained service dogs for children with selective mutism. The dogs can become a bridge for communication, a safe intermediary. And for children with trauma, they provide constant emotional support." Finding Bailey took 4 months. He came from Partners, a service dog training facility in Minnesota. Unlike typical service dogs trained for physical disabilities, Bailey had specialized training for psychological support and communication assistance. His trainer had spent 20 weeks teaching Bailey over 100 different commands, many responding to subtle hand signals that Emma could use without speaking. The day Bailey arrived, something shifted in Emma. She didn't speak, but she smiled, really smiled, for the first time since that March night. Bailey seemed to understand his job instinctively. He would position himself between Emma and anything that made her anxious. He learned her routine, waking her gently from nightmares with soft nose bumps, sitting pressed against her legs during therapy sessions, even carrying notes in a special pouch to her teacher when Emma needed something. But the most remarkable development was the communication system Emma and Bailey developed together, beyond what had trained. It started small. Emma would tap Bailey's collar twice if she was hungry, 3 times if she needed the bathroom. But over months of constant companionship, their language grew complex. Jennifer would watch in amazement as Emma's fingers would dance across Bailey's golden fur in patterns, and Bailey would respond by bringing specific toys, leading her to different rooms, or performing particular behaviors. Doctor was fascinated. She's created her own linguistic system with Bailey as the medium, she explained to Jennifer. It's actually quite sophisticated. The dog has become not just her companion, but literally her voice in the world. What nobody knew, not Jennifer, not Doctor, not even who checked in monthly, was that Emma had taught Bailey one special signal, one command that was hers alone. She trained him during those supervised visits with her father that the court had mandated. While Robert sat on his phone, barely paying attention, Emma had worked with Bailey using treats she'd hidden in her pockets. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, circular motion. It meant show everyone the danger. She'd practiced it over and over, hoping she'd never need it, but knowing somehow that she might. Because the silence that had descended on Emma that March night wasn't just from trauma of witnessing violence. There were things that happened during those court-mandated visits with her father, things that happened when Robert would send Bailey to another room because dogs are dirty, and he didn't want fur on his expensive furniture. Things that Robert had convinced her no one would believe, especially from a girl who couldn't even speak to tell them. "If you ever try to tell anyone," Robert had whispered during one visit, his hand tight on her shoulder, "I'll make sure Bailey gets sent to the pound. You know what happens to dogs at the pound, don't you, Emma? And who would believe a crazy mute girl anyway?" So Emma had kept her secret, buried it deep beneath her silence. But she had also prepared. Every night she and Bailey would practice their secret signal, Emma whispering soundlessly to him, "Someday, boy, someday you'll help me tell everyone the truth." That Thursday in courtroom number 7, someday had finally arrived. And Bailey, loyal, brilliant Bailey, had understood his job perfectly. The dog who had become Emma's voice was about to reveal what her stolen words could not, that the real danger to Emma Martinez wasn't poverty or instability or a mother who worked 2 jobs. The real danger wore expensive suits and had a smile that charmed everyone except the one creature who could see past it. A golden retriever whose loyalty to a little girl was about to expose a truth so dark that even veteran judge wasn't prepared for what would come next. Robert Martinez entered courtroom number 7 that morning like he owned it, which, considering he'd built the courthouse's new West Wing with his construction company, wasn't entirely inaccurate. His footsteps echoed with confidence on the marble floor, each click of his Italian leather shoes a declaration of success. At 41, Robert had the kind of presence that made people turn their heads. 6'2", broad-shouldered from his early years working construction before he became the man signing the checks, with silver threading through his dark hair in a way that suggested distinction rather than age. He'd chosen his courtroom attire with the same precision he applied to multi-million-dollar bids, a charcoal Tom Ford suit that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, a burgundy tie that Jennifer had bought him for their 10th anniversary, a detail he made sure to mention within earshot of reporters, and cufflinks bearing the logo of Martinez Construction, the company that had transformed Cedar Rapids' skyline over the past decade. "Your Honor," Robert began when called to testify, his voice carrying the perfect blend of respect and authority, "I want to thank you for your time and consideration in this matter. I know the court's docket is full, and I appreciate your dedication to ensuring Emma's best interests are served." Judge nodded, noting how Robert made eye contact not just with her, but with the court reporter, the bailiff, even members of the gallery. This was a man who understood the power of connection, of making everyone feel seen and important. It was a skill that had won him contracts, city council support, and the admiration of Cedar Rapids' elite. Robert's attorney, William Chambers, stood to begin the direct examination. Chambers himself was a strategic choice. Iowa's most successful family lawyer with a reputation for turning difficult cases into victories. He'd been retained for a fee that could have paid Jennifer's rent for 3 years. "Mr. Martinez, could you please describe for the court your living situation and how it would accommodate Emma?" Robert shifted slightly, angling his body to include both the judge and gallery in his response. "Of course. I've recently purchased a home in Estates. It's a gated community with excellent security, which I think is important for Emma given her current vulnerabilities." He paused, letting the weight of Emma's condition settle over the room. The house is 4,800 square feet with 5 bedrooms. Emma would have not just her own room but an entire wing, a bedroom, a playroom, and a study for when homework becomes more demanding. He clicked a remote and photographs appeared on the courtroom's display screen. The house was stunning, a modern colonial with soaring windows, pristine landscaping, and a pool that sparkled like a sapphire. But Robert was too smart to focus solely on luxury. "More importantly," he continued, "the backyard is fully fenced, 2 acres where Bailey can run freely. I've already had a local trainer assess the space, and he's confirmed it's ideal for a service dog's exercise needs. There's even a heated outbuilding that could be converted into an indoor training area for winter months." Chambers nodded approvingly. "And what about Emma's education?" "I've secured a spot for Emma at Academy," Robert replied, producing an acceptance letter with the prestigious private school's letterhead. "They have only 12 students per class, and their special education coordinator, Dr. Miles, has already developed a preliminary support plan for Emma's selective mutism. They have a full-time speech therapist on staff, and they're one of only 3 schools in Iowa certified in the prompt therapy technique for communication disorders." The presentation continued with the precision of a military campaign. Financial statements showing Robert's net worth of $8.7 million. Bank accounts already established for Emma's college fund with $100,000 deposited. Documentation of the best pediatric specialists in the state, all accepting new patients, all within the coverage of Robert's platinum-level health insurance. "Mr. Martinez," Chambers continued, "you've been quite successful in your business. How would you balance work obligations with parenting responsibilities?" Robert's expression softened, a perfectly calculated display of paternal concern. "My success means nothing without my daughter, Mr. Chambers. I've already restructured my role at the company. My COO, James Whitman, will handle day-to-day operations. I'll work primarily from home with office visits limited to when Emma is in school. Every afternoon will be hers, every weekend, every holiday." He turned to look at Emma then, his eyes glistening with what appeared to be genuine emotion. "I know I wasn't always present enough during the marriage. Building the business consumed me. But losing Emma for these past months during the separation, it's changed me. Success means nothing if I can't share it with my little girl." Several people in the gallery dabbed at their eyes. Even Judge seemed moved. Robert was hitting every note perfectly, the reformed workaholic, the devoted father, the provider who could give Emma every advantage in life. "Let's discuss the recent supervised visitations," Chambers said, consulting his notes. "How would you characterize those interactions?" "Challenging but improving," Robert replied thoughtfully. "Emma's condition makes communication difficult, obviously, but we've developed our routines. I've learned basic sign language. See." He demonstrated a few signs. "We do art together. Emma loves to paint. I've converted one room in the new house into an art studio for her. We cook together too, her grandmother's recipes, the dishes that connect her to her heritage." He produced a photo album then, filled with pictures from the supervised visits. Emma and Robert at a pottery class. Emma and Robert at the zoo, Bailey visible in the background. Emma showing Robert a drawing while he smiled with apparent pride. Each photo carefully curated to show a father desperately trying to connect with his traumatized daughter. "Your Honor," Chambers interjected, "I'd like to submit Exhibit 47, letters of support for Mr. Martinez's custody petition." The stack was impressive. The mayor of Cedar Rapids praising Robert as a pillar of the community. The president of the Chamber of Commerce nodding his charitable contributions. Emma's former principal, before she'd had to switch schools due to the trauma, describing Robert's involvement in PTA activities. 19 letters in total, each one a testament to Robert Martinez's standing in the community. But the came when Chambers asked about Jennifer. "Mr. Martinez, what is your position on your ex-wife's role in Emma's life?" Robert's face became somber, thoughtful. "Jennifer is Emma's mother, and she always will be. I'm not trying to take that away. I've already drafted a generous visitation proposal, every other weekend, alternative holidays, a full month in summer. I'll provide transportation so Jennifer doesn't have to worry about that expense. I'll even pay for family therapy so we can all learn to co-parent effectively despite our differences." He paused, letting his magnanimity sink in. "I know Jennifer has done her best with limited resources. This isn't about punishing her. It's about giving Emma the opportunities she deserves, the specialists she needs, the education that will help her overcome her challenges, the stable, secure environment where she can heal." Judge leaned forward. "Mr. Martinez, you paint a very compelling picture, but I have to ask, why do you think Emma has remained mute all this time? What's your understanding of her condition?" For the first time, a flicker of something else crossed Robert's face, so quick that only the court camera caught it, but he recovered instantly. "Your Honor, I'm not a psychologist, but I believe Emma was traumatized by the conflict between Jennifer and me. Children internalize these things. They blame themselves. Emma's silence is her way of trying not to choose sides, not to hurt either parent. That's why I believe a stable, resource-rich environment is crucial. With the right therapy, the right support, I truly believe Emma will find her voice again." He looked directly at Emma then, his expression soft, paternal, perfect. "I just want my little girl to sing again. I want to hear her laugh. I want her to know that Daddy will do whatever it takes to help her heal." The performance was flawless. Several jurors were visibly moved. Jennifer's attorney, David Park, was scribbling frantically, trying to find some crack in the armor Robert had presented, but there seemed to be none. Robert Martinez had presented himself as the ideal father, reformed, devoted, and equipped with every resource imaginable to help his daughter. As Robert returned to his seat, he allowed himself a small smile. Everything was going according to plan. The courtroom was his, just like those construction contracts, just like the city council votes, just like everything else he'd ever wanted. He glanced at Emma, still silent in her witness chair, Bailey beside her. The dog looked at him, those golden eyes unblinking, almost knowing. Robert's smile faltered for just a moment. But then Chambers was patting him on the shoulder, whispering, "Excellent job. We've got this." Robert Martinez had given the performance of his life. In just under an hour, he'd presented himself as Father of the Year, a man who'd conquered the business world and was now ready to devote himself entirely to his daughter's recovery. The courtroom was convinced. The judge seemed impressed. Even Jennifer looked defeated. But Bailey wasn't convinced at all. And in just a few minutes, that golden retriever would show everyone what really lay beneath Robert Martinez's perfectly polished surface. Jennifer Martinez took the witness stand like someone walking to their own execution, shoulders squared, chin up, but with the unmistakable air of someone who knew they were fighting a losing battle. At 38, she looked older, worn down by double shifts, single motherhood, and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that coffee couldn't touch. Her borrowed suit, her sister Maria's from a job interview 3 years ago, hung loose on her frame. She'd lost 20 pounds since the separation, not from any diet plan but from the simple mathematics of choosing between her lunch and Emma's therapy copays. She sat down carefully, aware of every eye in the courtroom comparing her to Robert's polished presentation. Her hands, rough from hospital disinfectants and countless hours of manual labor, folded and unfolded in her lap. The fluorescent lights caught the thin gold band on her right hand, her mother's ring, the only jewelry she hadn't sold to pay for Bailey's training. David Park, her attorney, stood slowly. He was young, maybe 30, with the eager intensity of someone who still believed justice meant something more than who could afford the better lawyer. He'd taken Jennifer's case pro through legal aid, squeezing it between his paying clients, working nights and weekends to try to build something that could stand against Chambers' fortress of evidence. "Mrs. Martinez," Park began gently, "could you tell the court about your current living situation?" Jennifer's voice was quiet but steady. "I rent a 2-bedroom apartment on the southeast side, Avenue. It's not fancy, but it's clean, safe. The neighbors are good people. Mrs. Downstairs watches Emma sometimes when I have to work late. Mr. Next Door fixed our heater last winter when I couldn't afford a repairman." She paused, looking directly at Judge. "I know it's not a mansion, but it's home. Emma's artwork covers every wall. Her stuffed animals have names and stories. The kitchen table where she does her homework has marks from when she was learning to write, pressing too hard with her pencil. These things, they matter." "Tell us about your work schedule," Park prompted. "I work as a certified nursing assistant at Mercy Medical and pick up shifts at Prairie Hills Nursing Home when they're available. Yes, I work a lot, but I've arranged my schedule around Emma. I work nights when she's sleeping, Mrs. stays over. I'm there every morning to get her ready for school, every afternoon when she comes home. I haven't missed a single therapy appointment, not one." Jennifer pulled out a worn notebook, its cover held together with duct tape. "This is my log. Every day since Emma stopped speaking, I write down everything. What she ate, how she slept, any changes in behavior. Look," she flipped through pages covered in cramped handwriting. "March 15th. Emma tapped Bailey's collar 7 times during breakfast, new pattern. March 18th. Emma drew picture of house with black windows, anxiety about something. March 22nd. First time Emma smiled at joke in 2 weeks, progress." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "I know every sound she makes in her sleep. I know that she's afraid of thunderstorms now when she never was before. I know that she arranges her stuffed animals in a specific order that changes based on her anxiety levels. I know that when she pulls on her left earlobe, she's about to have a panic attack, and Bailey needs to do his pressure therapy." "What about resources for Emma's treatment?" Park asked. Jennifer's laugh was bitter. "Resources? I sold my car and take the bus. I sold my engagement ring, my grandmother's china, everything worth anything. I work extra shifts every holiday. Last Christmas, instead of presents, I paid for an additional therapy session with Dr. Resources." She looked at Robert. "Love is a resource. Time is a resource. Knowing your child is a resource." "Mrs. Martinez," Park said carefully, "you mentioned in your deposition that you've noticed changes in Emma after unsupervised visits with her father. Can you elaborate?" The courtroom grew quiet. This was new territory, something barely hinted at in the previous testimonies. Jennifer's hands stilled in her lap. At first, the supervised visits seemed okay. Emma would come home tired but stable. But when the court approved unsupervised visits 3 months ago, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Emma started having nightmares again, worse than before. She began pulling out her eyelashes. It's called trichotillomania, a sign of severe anxiety. And Bailey. "What about Bailey?" Park prompted. "Bailey changed. He's always been protective, but after the unsupervised visits started, he became hypervigilant. He started sleeping against Emma's door instead of on her bed. He began doing perimeter checks of the apartment, something he was never trained to do. And whenever Robert's name is mentioned, Bailey's hackles rise. Dogs know things, Your Honor. They sense what we can't see." Chambers stood immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. Mrs. Martinez is not a certified animal behaviorist. This is speculation." "Sustained," Judge ruled, but her eyes remained on Jennifer. Jennifer continued, her voice growing urgent. "There's more. Emma created a new signal with Bailey, one she wouldn't show me. I've seen her practicing it when she thinks I'm not looking. She only started after the unsupervised visits began. Why would she need a secret signal? What is she trying to tell us that she can't say? She turned to look at Emma, tears streaming down her face. Baby, I know you can't tell us what's wrong, but I see you. I see how you hold your breath when his car pulls up. I see how you pack Mr. Bunny. She pointed to a worn, stuffed rabbit in Emma's arms, extra tight on visit days like armor. I see everything, baby. Mommy sees. Mrs. Martinez, Park continued, Robert has presented significant financial advantages. How do you respond to that? Jennifer wiped her eyes, steel entering her voice. When Emma had her first panic attack, Robert was in a meeting. When she took her first steps after the trauma, learning to walk again because her body had forgotten from the stress, Robert was closing a deal. When she woke up screaming every night for 6 months, I was there. Every single night. She stood suddenly, ignoring protocol, addressing the entire courtroom. You want to know about resources? I'll tell you about resources. I taught myself sign language from YouTube videos on my lunch breaks. I learned about selective mutism from medical journals I could barely understand, reading them over and over until they made sense. I've become an expert in childhood trauma because my daughter needed me to be. Her voice broke. I might not have millions. Emma might not get a mansion or a private school, but she'll get a mother who knows that Tuesday is hard because that's when the trauma happened. She'll get a mother who understands that Bailey isn't just a dog, he's her lifeline, her voice, her protector. She'll get a mother who sold everything she owned to buy that dog because Emma needed him. Jennifer pulled out a folder, hands shaking. Your Honor, I'd like to submit these. Emails from Robert during our marriage. Texts. Voicemails. They show a pattern of control, of manipulation of. She paused, looking at Emma, of someone who shouldn't be alone with a vulnerable child. Chambers exploded. Objection. These materials weren't disclosed during discovery. This is an ambush. Your Honor, Park interjected quickly. These documents only became relevant after Mr. Martinez painted himself as a reformed, devoted father. They speak to credibility. Judge held up her hand. I'll review these in chambers. Continue, Mr. Park. But Jennifer wasn't done. She kept her biggest gamble for last. Your Honor, there's something else. 3 weeks ago, after an unsupervised visit, Emma came home with Bailey's collar twisted backward. Bailey never lets anyone touch his collar except Emma and his trainer. When I asked Emma about it, Jennifer's voice dropped to a whisper. She hid under her bed for 3 hours. Bailey wouldn't leave her side and he kept growling at nothing, at shadows, like he was remembering something. She looked directly at Robert now, her exhausted eyes blazing with maternal fury. What happened during that visit, Robert? What did you do that made Emma need to create a secret signal with her dog? What are you so afraid she'll tell us? Robert's face remained composed, but his knuckles were white as he gripped the table. Chambers was on his feet again, objecting, but Jennifer kept talking, her desperate gamble laid bare for everyone to see. I'm not asking for full custody, Jennifer said, her voice breaking. I'm asking for the truth. I'm asking for someone to listen to what Emma can't say. I'm asking you to look at Bailey, really look at him, and ask yourself why a dog trained to comfort is acting like a dog trained to protect. Something is wrong. Something is terribly, terribly wrong. As Jennifer returned to her seat, the courtroom was silent except for her quiet sobs. She'd thrown everything she had into the fight, her poverty, her exhaustion, her desperate mother's instinct that something dark was happening to her daughter. But against Robert's resources, his reputation, his perfect performance, it seemed like throwing pebbles at a fortress. David Park squeezed her shoulder gently. They both knew it wasn't enough. The emails were old, from during the marriage. The observations about Bailey were circumstantial. Her intuitions, however accurate, weren't evidence. In her witness chair, Emma watched her mother cry, her small hands moving over Bailey's fur in that same strange pattern. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, circular motion. Soon, very soon, everyone would understand what Jennifer had been desperately trying to tell them. The mother's desperate gamble was about to pay off in ways no one could have imagined. Retrie the courtroom clock showed 2:47 p.m. when Judge spoke the words everyone had been waiting for. "Emma Martinez, would you please come forward?" The judge's voice was gentle, carefully modulated to avoid frightening the small girl who held the key to everything. Emma's reaction was immediate and visceral. Her thin body went rigid in the gallery seat where she'd been sitting with the court-appointed child advocate, Mrs. Her breathing, previously steady, became shallow and rapid, the telltale signs of panic that Jennifer knew so well. Bailey, who had been lying quietly at Emma's feet, instantly rose to attention, his golden head pressing against Emma's leg in the trained response doctor called grounding pressure. The walk from the gallery to the witness stand couldn't have been more than 30 feet, but Emma moved as if walking through quicksand. Each step was deliberate, calculated, her black Mary Janes barely lifting from the floor. Bailey matched her pace perfectly, maintaining exact position at her left side, his vest catching the afternoon light that streamed through the tall courthouse windows. The packed courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath, even the reporters in the back row frozen in respectful silence. Emma wore the navy dress with white flowers that Jennifer had ironed so carefully that morning, but she'd added something, a small silver bracelet that hadn't been there earlier. Those who looked closely would later realize it was made of tiny bells, completely silent now, but ready to ring with any sudden movement. It was Emma's own alarm system, a child's desperate attempt at protection. As she approached the witness chair, Emma's eyes darted between her parents. Jennifer, tear-stained but trying to smile encouragingly. Robert, his expression carefully neutral but his jaw clenched tight. Emma's small hand found Bailey's head, fingers tangling in the soft fur behind his ears, her anchor in a storm of adult expectations and unspoken fears. Judge had come down from her bench, an unusual move that showed her understanding of the situation's delicacy. She knelt beside the witness chair, bringing herself to Emma's eye level. "Emma, sweetie, you don't have to sit up there if you don't want to. Would you prefer to sit at this table here?" She gestured to a lower table that had been set up specifically for child witnesses. Emma nodded, a tiny movement that sent the bells on her bracelet tinkling softly. The sound seemed to echo in the silent courtroom. She settled into the child-sized chair, Bailey immediately positioning himself at her feet, his body creating a barrier between Emma and the rest of the room. Mrs. stood nearby with communication boards and an iPad loaded with text-to-speech software, tools that had been approved for Emma's testimony. "Emma," Judge continued, her voice warm and patient, "I want you to know that you're very brave for being here today. We have some questions for you, but you can answer them any way that feels comfortable. You can point, use the boards, have Mrs. help you, or use Bailey. Whatever works for you, okay." Emma's fingers moved across Bailey's collar in what looked like nervous fidgeting to most observers. But Doctor, seated in the gallery as an expert witness, noticed the deliberate nature of the movements. She quickly wrote something on her notepad, showing it to the bailiff. The note read, "She's communicating with the dog. This is intentional." Robert's attorney, Chambers, stood carefully. He'd been coached on how to approach child witnesses, especially traumatized ones. His usual aggressive style was replaced with grandfatherly gentleness. "Emma, I'm Mr. Chambers. I just have a few questions for you. First, do you remember the fun times with your daddy, the trips to get ice cream?" Emma's response was subtle but telling. Her left hand, the one not touching Bailey, clenched into a fist so tight her knuckles went white. Bailey shifted, moving slightly closer to her chair. Emma looked at the communication board, then at Bailey, then back at the board. Her hand hovered over the yes card but didn't touch it. "It's okay," Chambers continued, his voice soothing. "Your daddy tells us you two have been painting together during visits. Do you like painting with daddy?" This time, Emma's breathing changed. It became irregular, the pattern Jennifer recognized from countless nights of comforting her daughter through anxiety attacks. Bailey responded immediately, standing and placing his head in Emma's lap, a trained behavior called deep pressure therapy designed to calm panic. But something else happened too. Emma's fingers, hidden from most of the courtroom's view by Bailey's body, began that strange pattern Jennifer had mentioned. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, circular motion. Judge noticed the change in Bailey's demeanor. The dog's usual calm service animal disposition had shifted. His ears were back, his body tense. "Emma," the judge said softly, "do you need a break?" Emma shook her head violently, the bells on her bracelet creating a discordant symphony. Her eyes were wide, pupils dilated with what any trauma specialist would recognize as fear. She looked at her mother, then at Judge, then at Bailey. Her mouth opened as if she wanted to speak, to scream, to let 732 days of silence finally break. But nothing came out except a soft, strangled whimper that broke Jennifer's heart all over again. "Your Honor," David Park interjected, "perhaps we could ask Emma about her living preferences in a different way. Emma, sweetheart, can you show us with Bailey? Can you tell Bailey who you feel safe with?" It was the word safe that triggered everything. Emma's entire body language transformed. She went from frozen to animated, her hands moving frantically across Bailey's collar and vest. To the untrained eye, it looked like a child having a breakdown, chaotically grabbing at her service dog. But Mrs., who had spent weeks with Emma preparing for this moment, saw something else entirely. "Your Honor," Mrs. said urgently, "Emma is using a communication pattern I've never seen before. This isn't random. She's giving Bailey specific instructions." Robert stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. She's clearly distressed. We should stop this." "Sit down, Mr. Martinez," Judge commanded, her voice sharp. She'd seen something in Robert's movement, not concern for his daughter, but fear. Raw, unmistakable fear. Emma's fingers completed their pattern one more time. 3 taps on Bailey's collar, a pause that stretched for 2 heartbeats, 2 more taps, then a circular motion with her thumb. She then did something she'd never done in court before. She stood up, walked to the communication board, and deliberately knocked it to the floor. The cards scattered across the courtroom floor. Yes, no, help, scared, safe, danger, home, stop. But one card landed face up directly in front of Judge. Danger. Emma stood trembling in the center of the witness area, her small body shaking like a leaf in a storm. She looked at Bailey, her eyes filled with tears that had been held back for 2 years. Then she spoke, not with words but with a single, clear gesture. She pointed at Bailey, then made the hand signal for go that she'd taught him in secret. Bailey looked at Emma, his golden eyes meeting hers in a moment of perfect understanding between a girl who couldn't speak and a dog who didn't need words. Emma nodded once, decisively, giving him permission to do what she'd trained him to do in all those secret sessions during unsupervised visits. "Emma," Judge said softly, recognizing they were on the precipice of something crucial, "are you asking Bailey to tell us something? Something you can't say?" Emma's response was to collapse into her chair, pull Mr. Bunny tight against her chest, and close her eyes. But her fingers, still visible to those watching carefully, tapped one more time against her leg. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, circular motion. The signal had been given. The secret Emma had held for months was about to be revealed. And Bailey, loyal, protective Bailey, was about to become the voice Emma couldn't find, the witness she couldn't be, the protector she desperately needed. The courtroom held its breath. Even the court reporter's fingers had stilled over her keys. Everyone watched the golden retriever, waiting to see what would happen when a little girl's secret signal was finally activated. Judge stood slowly, her decades of experience telling her she was about to witness something unprecedented in her courtroom. "Nobody move," she said quietly. "Let the dog do what Emma has asked him to do." The moment of truth had arrived. Emma had taken the stand in the only way she could, through the faithful companion she'd trained to be her voice when her own had been stolen by trauma and fear. Now it was Bailey's turn to testify. The transformation in Bailey was instantaneous and breathtaking. The gentle service dog who had spent 2 years as Emma's constant companion, who had been trained to provide comfort and calm, suddenly became something else entirely, a protector revealing a truth that had been hidden in plain sight. Bailey moved with deliberate purpose, his 70 pounds of golden retriever muscle suddenly taut with intention. He didn't run or lunge. Instead, he walked with the measured pace of a predator who had finally been given permission to hunt. His path took him first around the perimeter of the witness area, his nose low, sniffing as if following an invisible trail. Every person in the courtroom followed his movement, mesmerized by the deliberate nature of his actions. Judge remained standing, her hand raised to keep everyone in place. "Nobody interfere," she commanded. "This is still testimony." Bailey completed his circuit and paused at the table where Jennifer sat. He sniffed briefly at her hand, which she extended tremblingly toward him. His tail gave a single small wag, acknowledgement, not alert. Then he moved to the court reporter, the bailiff, Judge herself. Each time he would pause, sniff, and move on, his body language calm but focused. "What's he doing?" someone whispered from the gallery. Doctor, the child psychiatrist, spoke up from her seat. "He's establishing a baseline. He's showing us who isn't a threat. This is trained behavior, but I've never seen it in a service dog context. This is more like police K-9 training." Bailey approached Chambers next, and the expensive attorney actually stepped back. But Bailey merely sniffed and moved on, dismissing him as irrelevant. The dog was systematic, methodical, checking every person who had been near Emma during the proceedings. Then Bailey turned toward Robert Martinez. The change in the dog's demeanor was immediate and chilling. His hackles rose, the golden fur along his spine standing straight up. His lips pulled back slightly, not quite a snarl but a clear warning. A low growl emanated from deep in his chest, not the playful rumble of a dog at play, but something primal, dangerous. "Control that animal," Robert snapped, his polished composure cracking. "This is absurd, it's just a dog." But Bailey wasn't done. He stalked toward Robert with deliberate intent, each step measured and purposeful. When he was exactly 6 feet away, the precise distance trained service dogs are taught to maintain from threats, Bailey did something extraordinary. He began to perform a series of trained behaviors, each one specific and unmistakable to anyone familiar with service dog protocols. First, he sat perfectly straight and barked 3 times, the universal alert signal. Then he stood, circled Robert's table once while maintaining that exact 6-foot distance, and returned to his sitting position. He raised his right paw and held it extended, a pointing behavior aimed directly at Robert. "Your Honor," Mrs. gasped, "that's accusation protocol. Someone trained this dog to identify and indicate a specific threat. This isn't standard service dog training. This is witness protection training." Robert stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is ridiculous. You're going to let a dog dictate." Bailey's response cut him off. The dog barked once, sharp and commanding, then did something that sent chills through the courtroom. He lay down, rolled onto his side, and went completely still, playing dead. After 3 seconds, he jumped up, ran to Emma, and stood between her and Robert, his body forming a protective barrier. Emma, who had been watching with her eyes squeezed shut, suddenly opened them. Tears streamed down her face as she watched Bailey perform the routine she'd secretly taught him, using treats hidden during those unsupervised visits when Robert would leave her alone to take his important calls. "Oh my God," Jennifer breathed, understanding flooding her face. "Emma taught him to show us. She taught him to show us what Robert—" "Objection," Chambers roared. "This is hearsay of the worst kind. A dog cannot testify. This is theatrical nonsense with no evidentiary value." But Judge was watching Robert, not Chambers, and what she saw made her blood run cold. Robert's face had gone from red to white. His hands were clenched so tightly that his manicured nails were digging into his palms, And his eyes were fixed on Emma with an expression that could only be described as rage mixed with fear. "Mr. Martinez," Judge said slowly, "why don't you approach Bailey? If he's wrong, if this is all just a misunderstanding, surely you can demonstrate that by—" "I'm not going near that rabid animal," Robert snarled, his mask fully slipping now. "This is a setup. Jennifer trained that dog to—" Bailey interrupted with another series of behaviors. He picked up one of the scattered communication cards in his mouth, the one that said help, and carried it to Judge, dropping it at her feet. Then he retrieved another, scared, and placed it next to the first. Finally, he found danger and laid it deliberately on top of the others. The courtroom was dead silent except for Emma's quiet sobs and Bailey's panting. The dog returned to his position between Emma and Robert, but now he was in full protection mode, weight forward, muscles tensed, ready to defend. "Your Honor," Doctor stood from the gallery, her professional composure shaken. "I've been treating Emma for 2 years. The level of training required to teach Bailey these behaviors. It would have taken months of consistent work. Emma couldn't have done this unless she was desperately trying to tell us something. This is a child's cry for help using the only voice available to her." Robert's attorney, Chambers, tried one more time. "Your Honor, this is precisely why we need someone with resources to help Emma. She's clearly disturbed, training dogs to perform bizarre behaviors. She needs intensive therapy." Bailey cut him off with a behavior that nobody expected. He walked to Emma's chair, gently took the sleeve of her dress in his mouth, and lifted it slightly. There, on Emma's upper arm, were fatting bruises in a pattern that looked distinctly like finger marks. 4 fingers and a thumb, the kind of bruise that comes from being grabbed too hard by an adult hand. The courtroom erupted. Jennifer screamed, "I knew it," and tried to rush to Emma, held back by David Park. Chambers was shouting about inadmissible evidence. The gallery was in chaos, reporters frantically typing on their phones. But above it all, Robert's voice rose in desperate anger. "She's lying. The dog doesn't prove anything. Those bruises could be from anything. She falls all the time. She's clumsy. This is a witch hunt." Judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "Order. Mr. Martinez, sit down immediately or I will have you restrained." But the damage was done. Robert had just referred to Emma as lying, a word that implied communication, admission that Emma had indeed been trying to tell them something. His carefully constructed facade of the concerned father had crumbled completely. Bailey maintained his position, standing guard over Emma, who had curled into a ball in her chair, Mr. Bunny pressed against her face. The dog's message had been clear, delivered in the only language Emma could use. Robert Martinez was a danger. Robert Martinez had hurt her. Robert Martinez was the reason for her silence. "Bailiff," Judge said, her voice deadly calm, "please call for a Child Protective Services emergency response team and contact the Cedar Rapids Police Department. Tell them we need a detective from the Special Victims Unit." Robert stood again, his face contorted with rage. "You can't do this based on a dog's behavior. This is America. I have rights. I want another judge. This is prejudicial. That dog was coached. This is all Jennifer's doing." But Bailey had one more message to deliver. As Robert ranted, the dog walked calmly to the evidence table where various exhibits were displayed. With precise determination, he knocked over a framed photo, the one Robert had submitted showing him and Emma at the pottery class. The photo fell face down, and when the bailiff picked it up, he noticed something nobody had seen before. In the reflection of the pottery studio window behind Robert and Emma, barely visible but unmistakable when you knew to look, was Emma's reflection. And in that reflection, her mouth was open in what was clearly a scream, a silent scream that the photo's angle hadn't captured directly. But Bailey had been in that photo too, in the background, and he had remembered. He had always remembered. The golden retriever had just given testimony that no human could have provided, revealing a truth that no words could have conveyed. Emma's secret signal had worked exactly as she'd planned, and Bailey had proven himself not just a service dog, but a guardian angel with 4 paws and an unshakable devotion to a little girl who needed someone to speak for her. The shocking accusation hung in the air like smoke after an explosion, and everyone in courtroom number 7 understood that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. A dog bearing witness to crimes that might have otherwise remained hidden forever. The Cedar Rapids County Courthouse had never seen anything like the next 30 minutes. What had begun as a custody hearing had transformed into something far darker, and Judge moved with the swift precision of someone who understood that a child's safety hung in the balance. "This court is now in emergency session," Judge declared, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Mr. Robert Martinez, you are hereby ordered to remain in this courtroom. Bailiff, please position yourself at the defendant's table." Robert's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. "This is false imprisonment. I'm calling my lawyer my real lawyer, not this incompetent." "Mr. Martinez," Judge interrupted, "you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." The Child Protective Services team arrived within 12 minutes, a record response time that would later be attributed to the fact that 3 CPS workers had been in the courthouse for other cases and had responded immediately to the emergency call. Dr. Rachel Morgan, the lead investigator, entered the courtroom with the practiced calm of someone who had seen too much but still held hope for justice. "Emma," Dr. Morgan said gently, kneeling beside the girl who hadn't moved from her chair, "my name is Rachel. I'm here to help. Would it be okay if we went to a quieter room? Bailey can come too, of course." Emma looked up, her tear-stained face a masterpiece of fear and exhaustion. But then she did something remarkable. She nodded and reached for Dr. Morgan's hand. It was the first time in 2 years she had voluntarily touched a stranger. Bailey rose immediately, maintaining his protective position as they walked toward the conference room. "Your Honor," Robert shouted, desperation cracking his voice, "I demand to know what I'm being accused of. A dog's behavior is not evidence. This is a violation of my constitutional rights." Judge turned to him, and the fury in her eyes made even the veteran court reporter step back. "Mr. Martinez, Bailey's behavior is not the evidence. It's the key that's unlocking the evidence. The bruises on your daughter's arms, the documented behavioral changes, the service dog's trained responses to specific threats, these are all pieces of a puzzle that's becoming terrifyingly clear." Detective James Harrison from the Special Victims Unit had arrived, his presence adding gravity to an already tense situation. He approached Judge quietly, and their whispered conversation lasted only moments before the judge nodded grimly. "Mr. Martinez," Detective Harrison said, producing his badge, "I need you to come with me for questioning regarding potential child abuse charges. You have the right to an attorney." "This is insane," Robert exploded, slamming his fist on the table. "She's my daughter. I would never. That dog doesn't prove anything. Those bruises could be from playing, from falling, from your hands," a small voice said from the doorway. Everyone froze. The voice was thin, raspy from disuse, barely more than a whisper, but it was unmistakably Emma's. The little girl stood in the conference room doorway, Dr. Morgan on one side, Bailey on the other. Her mouth was open, and words, actual words, were coming out for the first time in 732 days. You hurt me," Emma continued, each word seeming to physically pain her but flowing nonetheless as if the dam had finally broken. "You said, if I told, Bailey would die, you said. No one would believe. A crazy mute girl." The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights humming. Jennifer had collapsed to her knees, sobbing. Judge had tears streaming down her face. Even hardened Detective Harrison looked shaken. You did bad things." Emma's voice grew stronger with each word, as if finding it again after so long was like learning to breathe. "During visits, when you sent Bailey away, You said it was our secret, our special game, but it hurt. It always hurt." "She's lying." Robert lunged toward Emma, but Bailey was faster. The golden retriever intercepted him with a body block that would have made a professional linebacker proud, sending Robert stumbling backward into the waiting arms of bailiff and Detective Harrison. "Robert Martinez, you're under arrest for suspected child abuse," Detective Harrison said, producing handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." "I'll ruin all of you," Robert screamed as they restrained him. "I built this town, I own judges, I'll destroy everyone in this room, that lying little brat." His words were cut off as they dragged him from the courtroom, his threats echoing down the marble hallways. But in the courtroom, a different sound was filling the space, Emma's voice, growing clearer with each passing moment. "Mommy," Emma said, and Jennifer ran to her, catching her daughter as her legs gave out. They collapsed together on the floor, holding each other as 2 years of silence ended in a flood of words and tears. "Mommy, I wanted to tell you. I wanted to tell so bad. But he said he'd hurt Bailey. And I couldn't let him hurt you." Bailey joined them on the floor, his big body wrapping around both of them protectively, his tail wagging for the first time during the entire proceeding. The service dog who had carried Emma's secret, who had been her voice when she had none, was finally able to just be a dog comforting his family. Judge cleared the courtroom of everyone except essential personnel and the Martinez family. What followed was 2 hours of gentle questioning, with Emma's voice growing stronger as she revealed the horrible truth of what had happened during those unsupervised visits. The details were recorded for the criminal case, but they were the kind of details that made seasoned professionals sick to their stomachs. Robert had been careful, calculating. The abuse was psychological as much as physical, designed to leave minimal physical evidence. But Emma had been smarter. She had trained Bailey in secret, creating a fail-safe, a way to reveal the truth if she ever got the courage. And today, in this courtroom, with her mother fighting for her and a judge who truly saw her, she had found that courage. 6 months later, the same courtroom was packed again, but the atmosphere was completely different. Robert Martinez stood in an orange jumpsuit as judge read his sentence. 15 years in federal prison for multiple counts of child abuse, with no possibility of early release. Robert's empire had crumbled with stunning speed. Investigation had revealed Emma wasn't his only victim. There were others, children of employees who had been too frightened to speak up against the powerful businessman. Bailey's testimony had opened a floodgate that washed away years of carefully hidden crimes. But the real triumph was what happened after the sentence was read. Emma stood up in the gallery, her voice clear and strong. "Your Honor, I'd like to say something." Judge smiled, the same woman who had seen through the performance to the truth. "Of course, Emma, please go ahead." Emma walked to the front of the courtroom, Bailey at her side as always. She was taller now, healthier, her eyes bright with something that had been missing for so long, hope. "Bailey saved me," she said simply. "When I couldn't speak, he was my voice. When I couldn't be brave, he was brave for me. So Mom and I want to announce something." She looked at Jennifer, who nodded encouragingly. "We're starting the Emma and Bailey Foundation. We're going to train service dogs specially for kids who can't speak up about abuse. We're going to give them voices like Bailey gave me mine." The courtroom erupted in applause. Judge didn't even try to call for order. Sometimes justice needed to roar its approval. Emma continued, her voice now confident, even joyful. "I know there are other kids out there who are scared like I was, who think no one will believe them, who think they have to stay silent to stay safe. But they don't. If a dog can testify, if a little girl who couldn't speak for 2 years can find her voice again, then anything is possible." She knelt down and hugged Bailey, whispering something in his ear that made his tail wag furiously. Then she stood and said the words that would become the Foundation's motto, words that would eventually help save hundreds of other children. "Sometimes the bravest voice is the one that doesn't use words at all." Sometimes heroes have 4 paws instead of 2 feet, and sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places, like a secret signal between a silent girl and her golden guardian. As Emma walked out of the courtroom that day, hand in hand with her mother, Bailey prancing beside them, the February sun broke through the clouds and streamed through the courthouse windows. It illuminated them like a spotlight, this unlikely trio who had fought a monster and won. The last image the court reporter would remember was Emma stopping at the courthouse door, turning back to look at the room where her life had changed, and speaking one final truth. "My name is Emma Martinez. I am 9 years old. I was silent for 2 years, but I'm not silent anymore, and I never will be again." Justice hadn't just been served that day. It had roared with the voice of a little girl who had found hers again, thanks to a golden retriever who had never stopped believing she had something to say.